Hi. Okay. Hi, this is Madam Carmen, and we're here with my BDSM 101. And today we're going to talk about sensual domination. Sensual domination is a heightened, kinky, and erotic experience. It's a great way to express your dominance or your D-type energy, and incorporating aftercare into that scene. It's a great alternative to extreme domination for those who desire a much more sensual experience rather than painful. One thing that I like to tell people is we're not just touching for pleasure, we're touching for a reaction, we're touching for experience, and we're touching for healing. It's important that we use our senses to become more aware of our partner and their senses and their feelings and emotions and their presence in the scene. Sensual domination uses a lot of physical interaction and engaging. So if it's not something that you would like to experience with more physical touch, then you may want to explore other alternatives. Now let's be clear that skin to skin and skin on skin contact is not always necessary for sensual domination, but it is a vital part to sensual domination. I mean, how can you use your senses if you can't use your senses? A great way to be more aware of your partner's limits and kinks when it comes to sensual domination is being more aware of what turns them on, what arouses them, what brings them to forms of stimulation. And that could be any forms of play, but what forms of sensations or what senses are being used in that process. You also want to become very much more aware of your erogenous zones or your G-spot, as well as your pheromonious areas. So your pheromonious areas can include your neck and chin area, your armpit, your breast and chest area, your genitalia area, as well as your butt. Your erogenous zones most times kind of correlate with your pheromonious areas, but they're not limited to. So being mindful that your erogenous zones are of your own. So thus what stimulates you, what brings you to that amount of pleasure, what areas of the body need to be targeted to get to that point. One thing that a lot of people don't discuss in sensual domination is exactly how the D-type actually enforces their dominance in the scene. Because of it being sensual, people think that the dominant is being, I guess, weak or less aggressive or less dominant, when people don't realize that in any form of domination or any form of play, a lot of psychological domination and exchange has a major role in what makes things extreme, to what makes things sensual, to what makes things more sadistic for someone too as well. So we've of course touched on many different ways of establishing trust in relationships and in dynamics. In order for any form of play to happen, we have to establish trust. And this particular form of sensual domination, or if you will, like I said, if this particular form of domination, which is sensual domination, you want to make sure that you are aware of, like I said, those erogenous zones, as well as all of those hot pressure points and those hot areas that they will prefer to be targeted. So gaining the trust is staying within those guidelines and within those limits and boundaries. Another important factor to any form of domination is checking in. In this particular case, for sensual domination, checking in includes not only just asking are they okay, but also checking the body and making sure that we're not also leaving behind any markings from any form of play, like such as wax play. A great way to bring someone into a subspace in sensual domination is eye contact. Eye gazing is a great way to be able to get that person in that psychological state and also in that transic state of being, but also it's still establishing that trust. So with the eye gazing, knowing that that person is able to actually look you in the eye as you are performing or demonstrating or scening with this particular person, you are also aware of them in the scene and they are visible in your space. Eye gazing is a great form of nonverbal communication. There are other forms of nonverbal communication, which is major sensation play and sensual domination, because we're using our senses rather than just actual verbal communication. So our senses are being used to communicate, whether that is touch, whether that is using your senses of smell, or whether your sense of hearing. So a great form of psychological play or domination in sensual domination is sensory deprivation. Now, I know that when it comes to sensual domination, it's important to play on those senses, but we also are playing off those senses too. So taking away and depriving someone of their senses while also participating in sensation play and actually engaging in other forms of play that include their other senses that are not deprived actually heightens the experience as a whole, because thus it heightens the actual sensations. Sensual domination is a great way for someone to explore acceptance and trust in their partner because of the, like I said, the sensory deprivation part of sensation play and sensual domination. A lot of that includes trust because of the blindfolds, as well as utilizing different toys and tools that play on sensations like violet wands, needles, pinwheels, and vampire gloves, just anything that pretty much kind of plays on the senses. We want to make sure that we know that we are safe. So you want to be aware of the risk. So in
sensual.
Oh my God. So in sensual domination, we want to also be aware not only of the risk of sensory deprivation, but the risk of the overstimulation of senses. When it comes to sensual domination, we have to be aware of the overstimulation of senses. And that is the heightened reactionary experience that someone may have when it comes to their senses being played on or being tested or teased or deprived even. Sometimes if one sense is deprived, the other senses are heightened, and we're playing on those senses so much that they become overstimulated. And what may happen is this natural reactionary response that can actually include someone actually rejecting the play, maybe pushing them off, kicking, kind of like really just rejecting and kind of going into a withdrawal moment. And we have to be aware of those moments of overstimulation, even though sometimes that can be a particular way to play on a particular fetish or a particular kink, is to overstimulate one's body. I've heard of clitoral overstimulation, penile overstimulation, because of the actual nerve endings. Now, a lot of times that people may experience the temporary numbing experience when it comes to overstimulation of certain senses or certain areas of the body, but we have to be aware that it only lasts so long. It's only a temporary experience, but I also know that not a lot of people can like psychologically just subject themselves to experience something like that. In that case, it's like a form of pain. And like I said, with this being a form of sensual domination, and this being an alternative to extreme domination, a less painful experience, we have to still remember that even though we want to experience a less painful interaction or engagement in BDSM, there are still masochistic elements in this form of domination that may not be a form of physical pain, but psychologically. So we have to be aware of that too, as well as the risks. I'll say for instance, and for example, when it comes to something like that, I honestly believe that it's important to discuss and negotiate everything beforehand anyway, before you actually scene with anybody, and knowing how they feel about sensory deprivation as well as an overstimulation of their senses, and if they've experienced either of those beforehand. Now, if this person has experienced sensory deprivation and they're like, yeah, I don't like not being in the know. Like, some people don't like being deprived of their sight, so they're not being able to see anything, but they can hear certain things, and that can sometimes psychologically compromise or conflict somebody in a particular setting or scene, and we want to be aware of those things. But that's why we do those checking in and we do those negotiation. So that could actually be a soft limit or actual hard limit for someone, and we just don't know that, and they may have just experienced that within scene, and that's when we most times learn our actual limits, is by actually experiencing them. Now, if this person is experiencing something of an overstimulation of their senses and they're like, I can't do this. A lot of times I've actually experienced this with someone. A lot of times, a lot of people don't want to psychologically go down that road, and they're not ready to go down that road of like being able to experience that form of vulnerability. It's a one thing for someone to receive pain through many different elements and like instruments, like being spanked. It could be more of a sexual experience or more of a disciplinarian experience than a sexual experience. Whereas a sensual domination that includes the overstimulation of the senses, or just including senses as a whole, a lot of times it can seem a little bit more intimate for someone, and they're not really ready to become that intimate in a scene or BDSM setting with someone. As I'll use the example that if we are at a play party and someone wants to experience a scene with me and I bring out my vampire gloves. So after experiencing like some light impact play, I like lightly started grazing their buttocks. And, you know, if I didn't negotiate beforehand that I was going to use this particular item, which are these gloves with these particular and stuff on there, little spikes on there, that can bring someone to some place psychologically. And that's the reason why people do like sensual domination, because it kind of helps you get to that subspace a little bit faster too, psychologically versus physically. So it depends on what a person is trying to experience and where they're trying to go with reaching a subspace or reaching a place of pleasure or this peak of eroticism that they're trying to really explore and experience for themselves. So it's really important to kind of just like discuss those types of things beforehand, so then they know. Because I don't think it's easy for somebody to say, hey, look, I'm planning on overstimulating you and your senses today. A lot of times they don't know that their senses are going to be overstimulated, but a lot of times if they have experienced overstimulation of their senses, then they can be aware to tell you in that negotiation stage.